Picture the position you're in. It's the Middle Ages. You rule a kingdom, and someone is coming to take it. You have a treasury, a border, and one question that matters more than any other. What does the best soldier in the world actually cost? Everyone around you gives the same answer. The knight. Armored, mounted, trained for war since he was 7 years old. That answer is wrong. The knight is about to become the worst purchase in your entire kingdom. The men who actually fit this job are stranger, deadlier, and far more expensive. Because over the next few minutes, you're going to build the medieval version of special forces. Nobody used that phrase back then, but the ingredients are identical. Small numbers, rare skills, enormous cost, outsized results. And along the way, you're going to discover 4 things. Why the deadliest bodyguards on Earth held the legal right to loot the palace on the day their employer died. Why the city of Florence paid its most dangerous enemy a fortune to do absolutely nothing. Why the finest soldiers of an entire empire ended up killing the man whose only job was to pay them. And why, across 800 years, one rule of this business was never broken. You don't own elite soldiers, you rent them, and the rent only ever moves in one direction. Start where every ruler starts. You need one elite soldier, so you price out the famous one. In 14th century England, an ordinary laborer earns about £2 a year. Remember that number. It's your unit of measurement. One working man, 1 year. The knight's armor, everything he wears into battle, is valued around £16. 8 years of a working man's life, hammered into steel and carried on one body. Want the imported kind ready-made plate from the workshops of Milan? Over £8 a suit, and that's the mass-produced version. Then comes the part nobody warns you about. The horse. An ordinary riding horse costs £3. A trained war horse, a destrier, averages £35 to £40, with records of animals selling for £80 and more. In 1331, King Edward III paid £120 for a single horse. 60 years of a laborer's wages. Standing on 4 legs, and 1 arrow can delete it, which happens constantly. On campaign, horse losses often outpaced human casualties. So your knight doesn't bring 1 horse to war. He brings 2 or 3, because somewhere on that campaign, you will both stand there watching 60 years of wages bleed out in the mud, and the war will not pause for it. And each of those horses eats every day. The armor needs a squire to maintain it. Every strap, shoe, and blade wears out on schedule. The bill you thought you'd settled keeps arriving. You are not buying a soldier, you are insuring a stable. Add it all up, and one fully equipped knight represents decades of ordinary income before he ever swings a sword. Destriers were the expensive exception, not the average warhorse. The medieval battlefield ran on animals that were valuable simply because they had to survive it. This isn't an army. It's a rolling collection of luxury assets. And now the real problem. You've paid for all of it, and you still don't control him. The feudal contract has a defect built into its core. Your knight owes you military service in exchange for land, but the obligation is traditionally capped, in England, at roughly 40 days a year. In principle, once those 40 days expire, the finest soldier in your army is entitled to turn his horse around and ride home. Mid-campaign, mid-siege, mid-war. Which leaves you 2 options. Watch the most expensive man in your army ride away, or reach back into the treasury and pay him wages on top of everything you've already spent. That gives your elite force 2 fatal weaknesses. The first, it expires. Serious wars run for months, and your knights run out like a subscription. The second, his loyalty is anchored to land, not to you. A man with his own estates has his own interests, his own feuds, and occasionally his own opinion about who should be wearing your crown. Every ruler from England to Constantinople hits this same wall, and every one of them reaches the same conclusion. If land can't buy permanent elite soldiers, cash will have to. And the moment elite violence goes on a payroll, it becomes a market. Markets have prices, and sellers negotiate. This market is about to produce some of the strangest prices in history, and hand its sellers a kind of power no vassal ever had. The purest version appears in Constantinople. In 988, the Byzantine Emperor Basil II is facing a rebellion his own troops can't put down, so he imports roughly 6,000 Norse warriors from the Prince of Kiev. They fight so well, he never lets them go. They become the Varangian Guard, the emperor's personal special forces, and their employment contract is one of the most revealing documents in medieval economics. Look at it from the other side of the counter for a moment. You're a young man from a fjord village in Norway, and to get this job, to be allowed to risk your life for a foreign emperor, you pay. Admission to the guard reportedly cost between 7 and 16 pounds of gold, sometimes loaned to the recruit by the emperor himself. Sit with that. The job was so profitable that men paid an entrance fee to do it. First, you paid to get in. Then you earned, by some estimates, up to 3 times the salary of a regular Byzantine soldier, plus a share of battle plunder. But the real prize was a privilege the Norse called Polutasvarf. When an emperor died, the sagas tell us, the Varangians held the customary right to walk into the imperial treasury and carry out whatever they could hold in their hands. Palace looting, as a benefits package. One man reportedly went through it 3 times. His name was Harald Sigurdsson. Driven out of Norway at 15, he arrived in Constantinople a few years later with nothing. He served in the guard, rose to command it, collected his treasury runs, and went home with enough gold to buy his way into the Norwegian crown. Literally. He shared his fortune with the reigning king in exchange for half the kingdom, and within a year, the other half fell to him. He died in 1066 as King Harald Hardrada, invading England. A bodyguard job turned a teenage exile into a king. That was the recruitment poster. Scandinavia never stopped sending its young men south. But step back onto the throne and notice what you, the emperor, are actually buying. It isn't swordsmanship. Constantinople is full of soldiers. You are buying the one thing your own generals can't reliably sell you: loyalty. Foreigners. No local family, no local politics, no stake in any conspiracy at court. Their loyalty isn't emotional. It's structural. Betraying you would destroy the one thing they crossed the world for: the paycheck. Byzantium had discovered something profound. The most reliable soldier isn't the one who loves you. It's the one whose income dies with you. Hold on to that sentence. Because centuries later, another empire is going to get it exactly backwards, and it will cost a sultan his life. First, though, a different question. What happens when elite soldiers stop belonging to any ruler at all and float themselves on the open market? Switzerland answers it. The Alps produce no minerals, no trade monopolies, barely enough farmland. What they produce is infantry. Villages of poor young men, drilled relentlessly, fighting in pike squares that cavalry cannot break. After Swiss squares destroy the Duke of Burgundy's army in the 1470s, every crown in Europe wants them, and the Swiss cantons turn soldiers into their national export, negotiating formal contracts with foreign kings. The entire business runs on one rule, famous enough that it survives as a saying: no money, no Swiss. That isn't a joke, it's the terms of service. In 1522, outside Milan, unpaid Swiss pikemen forced their own French commander to attack a fortified position he knew was suicidal, because the alternative was watching them march home. Thousands of them died at Baccaca, proving the point. Read that again as an employer. Your soldiers just overruled your general. Somewhere between the recruiting office and the battlefield, the bargaining power changed hands, and you didn't notice. Italy pushes the model even further. The rich city-states of the Renaissance, Florence, Milan, Venice, find it cheaper to hire war than to fight it, and an entire profession grows around the contract itself. The condotta. The men who sign it are condottieri, contractors. The greatest of them is an Englishman named John Hawkwood, a tanner's son from Essex, whose inheritance was reportedly a sack of wheat and 20 pounds. He crosses into Italy with unemployed veterans of the 100 Years' War and builds the White Company into the most feared private army on the peninsula. His annual earnings as a captain range from 6,000 to 80,000 florins. A skilled Florentine craftsman earns 30 florins a year. In his best years, Hawkwood makes more than 2,500 times the wage of the artisans whose cities he menaces. And his single best trade involved no fighting at all. Put yourself behind the walls of Florence in 1375. An army is approaching, and it's his. You can fight him and risk your city, your trade, everything. Or you can do what merchants do best. You can run the numbers. Florence met Hawkwood with 130,000 florins, purely so he would stand aside. That's more than 4,000 years of a craftsman's wages, paid for 0 battles. And once one city paid, others learned to pay the same way. Hawkwood had discovered the perfect product in the violence business: the threat. A battle risks his army. A threat risks nothing and pays like a victory. You aren't paying him for a war. You are paying for the absence of one. He eventually settled into Florentine service, took citizenship, a pension, and a villa. When he died in 1394, Florence gave the mercenary a state funeral and later painted his portrait inside the cathedral, where it still hangs today. The city's highest honor for a man they'd once paid to go away. But mercenaries carry one flaw an employer can never fix. They can quit. They can be outbid. They can walk away mid-war. So what if you built soldiers who could never quit, never be outbid, never leave? The Ottoman Empire tried it. They built the perfect soldier, and the perfect soldier destroyed them. By this point, the story is moving beyond the Middle Ages and into the early modern period. Follow it anyway, because this is where the economic experiment reaches its most dangerous form. On paper, the Janissaries are the most controlled special forces ever designed. Christian boys taken from Balkan villages through a levy called the Devshirme, converted, trained from childhood, forbidden in the early centuries to marry or trade, legally slaves of the Sultan, cut off from every loyalty except him. And they are magnificent. A permanent, salaried, professional standing army, drilling year-round with firearms, while European kings are still begging knights for their 40 days. They are at the spearhead when Constantinople falls in 1453. For 2 centuries, they are among the best infantry on earth. Then, the payroll started voting. The first revolt comes in the 1440s. The demand is simple: higher wages. They win. And here is where the design flips inside out. Remember the Varangians, whose income died with the emperor? The Janissaries learn the opposite lesson. Their income grows every time they frighten a sultan. In 1589, paid in debased coins, they storm the palace and are bought off with the executions of the very officials they blame. More revolts follow. 1622, 1730, 1804, 1807. Each one has a price. Each price gets paid. You are no longer setting your soldiers' wages. They are. The one to remember is 1622. Sultan Osman II, humiliated by the Corps' performance against Poland, moves to discipline them and cut their pay. His own elite guard seizes him and kills him. Stop and feel the position he was in. You are the richest man in the empire. You command everything. And you have just discovered that your signature on the payroll is the only thing keeping you alive, and that the men you pay know it better than you do. The soldiers built to be the Sultan's property executed the Sultan. Overcompensation. By the early 19th century, the Corps has swollen past 130,000 names, most of them not active soldiers at all, just men holding a Janissary paybook the way you'd hold a government bond. The elite unit has become a pension fund with muskets, militarily useless, politically untouchable. It takes until 1826 for a sultan to finally destroy them, with artillery, in their own barracks, because by then, cannon fire is the only exit clause left in the contract. The empire spent 400 years paying its special forces, and the last 200 paying them protection money. Which leaves one honest question. If elite soldiers could bankrupt you, blackmail you, even kill you, why did every ruler in this story keep buying? Because the same system that generated these enormous costs could also generate enormous jackpots. Sometimes the payoff wasn't land. It wasn't wages. It wasn't even victory. It was the capture of one extremely valuable person. Medieval battle wasn't just battle. It was asset acquisition. The rules of chivalry priced every nobleman on the field. You didn't kill a captured knight, you invoiced him. And the ceiling on that market was set in 1356 when English forces at Poitiers captured the King of France himself. The ransom for John II was ultimately fixed at 3 million gold écus, roughly 3 years of the entire French crown's revenue. France introduced a new gold coin in 1360 to help finance the ransom. They called it the franc, traditionally linked to the idea of freedom, because the coin was tied to the king's release. The name of the French currency began as a ransom payment. One good afternoon with elite troops earned more than years of taxing an entire country. That's why the game never stopped. A special forces unit was a lottery ticket where the jackpot was another kingdom's treasury. So come back to your throne, because it's decision time, and now you can see the whole menu. Buy the feudal version, and one night costs you decades of a laborer's income in steel and horseflesh, then rides home when his 40 days expire. Cheap to keep, impossible to use. Rent the market version, and the Swiss and the condottieri will win your wars for staggering fees, right up until the day your enemy outbids you, or your unpaid army holds its own vote. Build the permanent version, and you get the Janissaries. Unbeatable for a century, unaffordable for the next, and unremovable for 200 years after that. Look at what you were actually sold at each stage. The knights sold you skill. The Varangians sold you loyalty. Hawkwood sold you the threat. The Janissaries sold you dependence. Every product was better than the last, and every bill was bigger because the product was never really soldiers. It was leverage. And leverage always, eventually, works out who needs whom. The pattern didn't die with the Middle Ages. Every state that hires elite private violence today is running the same contract with the same clause hidden inside it. And every so often, a modern mercenary column turns around and marches on its own capital, just to renegotiate. The Varangians looted the treasury the day the emperor died. Hawkwood billed Florence for peace. The Janissaries billed the Sultan for his own survival. Different centuries, same invoice. So if you ever find yourself on that throne, with a treasury, a war, and a market full of dangerous men, remember the one rule this industry has never broken. The sword you can afford points at your enemies. The sword you can't afford points at you.